Picture this, a quiet plantation in Georgia, 1849. The sun is sinking low, painting the fields in deep gold. And somewhere on that land, a man is screaming, his voice muffled beneath the heavy weight of earth. His slave, the woman who has served him for years, is the one holding the shovel. Why did she do it? What pushed her past fear, past the threat of the whip, to bury her master alive? This isn't just a story of revenge, it's a glimpse into a world of unimaginable cruelty and shocking courage. If stories like this grip you as much as they do me, hit that like button, subscribe for more untold history, and share this with a friend who loves dark, powerful tales from the past. Georgia, 1849. The world here moved slowly, but every moment pulsed with tension. The air was thick with humidity, carrying the scent of tilled earth, cotton, and smoke from nearby chimneys. Plantations sprawled like kingdoms, each one a self-contained world ruled by a single man and his wealth. For those who owned land, this was a time of power and prosperity. For those who were enslaved, it was a time of endless labor, fear, and silence. The plantation at the center of our story was no exception. Rows of cotton stretched far beyond the eye could see, their white blossoms glowing under the Georgia sun. The sound of cicadas filled the heavy air, mixing with the distant crack of a whip and the dull rhythm of wagon wheels creaking under harvest loads. Life here was relentless. Enslaved men and women worked from sunrise to sunset, their backs bent under the weight of both physical toil and a system designed to strip them of humanity. Every building on this land told a story. The grand house, with its tall white columns and polished windows, stood as a symbol of wealth and dominance. Just beyond it, cabins made of rough timber huddled together, barely large enough to house a family. Smoke curled from their chimneys, carrying the smell of simple meals, cornmeal, beans, scraps of whatever could be found. But beneath this carefully maintained image of Southern elegance, a quiet rage simmered. Enslaved people whispered their pain in hushed tones, their voices carrying stories of cruelty that were often too dangerous to repeat. And yet, there was resilience. A spark. The kind of strength that comes from generations surviving the unimaginable. This was the world she lived in, one of beauty and brutality, silence and secrets. A world on the edge of something dark. She was known only by her first name, a single word spoken sharply by her master and softly among her peers. Her surname was never hers to keep. That, like so much else, had been taken long ago. She was in her late 20s, her body lean from years of labor, her hands rough and scarred from picking cotton and hauling water. But it was her eyes that told the story best, quiet, watchful, and filled with a strength that had not yet been broken. Every morning before dawn, she rose from a thin straw mattress in a cabin she shared with others. The smell of damp wood and smoke clung to everything. She wrapped herself in the same faded dress she'd worn for years and tied a rag around her head, not out of vanity, but out of habit and armor of sorts. Then came the walk to the fields, the chorus of cicadas, and the grueling hours beneath. A sun that felt more like punishment than warmth. She had endured more than her share of cruelty. A back crisscrossed with scars testified to that, as did the way she flinched at sudden noises. Yet there was a calmness in her movements, a steady resolve. It was the kind of strength that doesn't shout or fight openly, it waits at night. When the work was done and the overseer's watchful eye finally disappeared, she would sit outside her cabin and stare at the sky. Stars stretched endlessly over the plantation, reminders of a freedom she couldn't yet touch but never stopped. Imagining. It was in these moments, in the stillness of the night, that the spark of something dangerous began to form. This was no ordinary woman, and her story was only just beginning. He was the kind of man whose power filled every corner of his land, even when he wasn't there. His name carried weight, whispered with either respect or fear, depending on who spoke it. To his peers, he was a successful planter, a man of ambition and wealth. To those who worked his fields, he was something closer to a tyrant. He had inherited the plantation from his father, and with it, a belief that human lives could be owned, controlled, and broken. He ruled with a strict, almost ritualistic cruelty. A mistake in the fields could mean a whipping. A look of defiance could mean worse. His temper was unpredictable, his punishments designed not just to hurt but to humiliate. The enslaved people on his land knew his footsteps by sound alone. The sharp click of polished boots on the porch, the slow crunch of gravel as he made his rounds. He carried himself with a cold confidence, the kind of arrogance that came from knowing no law would ever hold him accountable. In his world, he was untouchable, and yet, beneath his controlled exterior, there was a streak of paranoia. He ruled through fear because he knew fear was the only thing standing between him and the people he had oppressed for so long. He watched them carefully, scanning for even the slightest sign of rebellion, for the woman at the heart of this story. His shadow was always close. He decided when she worked, when she ate, when she slept. Every moment of her life was dictated by his whims. But the thing about fear is, when pushed too far, it can change. It can harden into something else entirely. Something he would never see coming. Rebellion never begins with a roar. It starts with whispers, quiet thoughts that creep in late at night, carried on the wind between the cabins. For her, those whispers had been growing louder with every passing year. She'd seen too much. Too many beatings, too many families torn apart, too many children sold away, their cries echoing through the plantation like ghosts that never left. She'd felt the sting of the whip herself, tasted blood from split lips, and endured nights of pain that left her body trembling. But she'd also watched. She'd memorized his patterns, when he left the house, how he moved, who he trusted. Every detail mattered. The breaking point didn't come from one act of cruelty. It came from many, layered on top of each other until the weight became unbearable. Maybe it was the night he dragged her back to the fields in the dark, forcing her to work long after her body had given out. Or maybe it was the day he humiliated an elderly man in front of the others, laughing as he fell to his knees. Those moments etched themselves into her mind like scars. Still, she was careful. She never let her anger show. She kept her head down, her expression calm. To him, she was just another shadow in the field. But in her heart, the spark had already been lit. She knew she couldn't fight him in the open. His world was too powerful, his cruelty too absolute. If she was going to act, it had to be in silence. It had to be planned. And it had to be final. She was beginning to imagine wasn't just resistance. It was justice. And justice would come with a shovel. Planning revenge under the gaze of a man like him was like breathing in a room full of smoke. Every movement had to be careful. Every glance calculated. She couldn't let anyone see the storm building inside her. On the surface, she remained quiet, obedient, almost invisible. But behind that calm exterior, her mind was sharp, always observing, always calculating. She noticed the times he left. His guards down. He had a habit of drinking late into the night, stumbling back to his room or sometimes out into the fields, confident no one would dare cross him. She saw how he dismissed the enslaved workers around him as harmless, like tools he believed couldn't think for themselves. That arrogance would be his downfall. Night after night, as the plantation settled into uneasy silence, she planned. She walked past the storage sheds and memorized what tools were there. She noted which paths were quietest, which doors squeaked, which didn't. Every detail mattered because she knew she'd have only one chance. Her courage wasn't loud or reckless. It was cold and deliberate. She didn't talk about her plan to anyone, not even those she trusted. Too many ears could be listening, and one careless word could cost her life. So she carried this secret alone, tucking it away like a blade in. Her heart died in the darkness. She rehearsed it all in her mind. The moment she would lure him out, the swing of the shovel, the sound of dirt hitting the ground. She imagined his face not with fear, but with shock, because men like him never thought the powerless could rise. This wasn't just revenge anymore, it was survival. And the night she chose to act was drawing closer. The night was heavy with heat, the kind that clung to your skin and made the air feel thick enough to drink. Crickets chirped in the darkness, and the plantation lay still, the big house glowing faintly from the light of a single oil lamp. It was the kind of quiet that almost felt staged, as if the world itself was holding its breath. He had been drinking again. She could smell the sweet, sour scent of whiskey as he staggered out of the house. His steps were uneven, but his arrogance was steady. He didn't bother locking doors or watching his back. Why would he? In his mind, no one on this land would ever dare to defy him. She moved in silence, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain it could be heard. Her hands gripped the wooden handle of the shovel tightly, her palms slick with sweat. This wasn't a moment of sudden rage. It was deliberate, almost ritualistic. Every step she took was one she had imagined countless times. He followed her without suspicion, perhaps thinking she was leading him somewhere for his amusement. The thought made her stomach twist. When they reached the edge of the woods, she turned, her expression unreadable, and struck. Dull and heavy a thud, swallowed by the night. He fell with a grunt, confusion flashing across his face before fear finally took root. He was alive, but dazed, his power crumbling in an instant. She dragged him to the pit she had dug earlier, her muscles trembling but steady. He screamed when the first shovelful of dirt hit him. She didn't stop. The earth fell faster, muffling. His voice bearing years of cruelty one handful at a time, dot by dawn. The plantation was silent. And he was gone dot at first. No one spoke of it out loud. The morning sun rose like any other day, bathing the fields in light. But there was a tension in the air, a sharpness, like a storm waiting to break. The master was nowhere to be seen, and that absence felt louder than his presence ever had. Enslaved workers moved cautiously, their eyes scanning for signs of danger. Was this a trick? Had he gone into town? Or worse, was he watching them, waiting for someone to slip up? Fear was a constant companion on the plantation, but this was something different. It was curiosity, confusion, and something else, something dangerous. Hope. Words spread in murmurs, passed between bent backs in the fields, whispered from one cabin to the next. He's gone. Ain't nobody seen him. They say she did it. The whispers grew bolder as the day went on. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others quietly felt something they hadn't felt in years. Pride. For so long, he had been untouchable. His presence had been like the sun, inescapable, oppressive, burning down on them every day. And now, gone. Just gone. She kept her head low, going about her work as if nothing had changed. But in the glances exchanged between her and the others, there was a silent understanding. They knew. Even if they never said it out loud, they knew. And though fear still gripped them, there was also a spark, a small light that flickered in the darkness of their lives. For the first time, they had proof that even the most powerful man on the plantation could bleed, could fall, could disappear. The legend was already beginning to take root right there in the fields where she stood. Silent and strong. The plantation erupted into chaos within days. His absence couldn't be ignored for long. He was too controlling, too meticulous to simply vanish. The overseers searched every corner of the property, barking orders, their faces pale with panic. They questioned everyone, but fear kept mouths. shut and eyes fixed on the ground. When his disappearance reached the neighboring plantations, whispers turned to rumors. Some claimed he'd run off with money, others said he'd been killed by thieves. The idea that one of his own slaves could have been responsible was almost unthinkable to those in power. It wasn't even a possibility they considered because, to them, enslaved people weren't capable of such boldness. That arrogance shielded her. For days she worked in silence, her movements calm, her expression blank. The pit where he lay buried was deep in the woods, away from paths and prying eyes. The earth was smooth now, covered with leaves and branches, nature itself hiding her. Act of defiance, but the atmosphere had changed. Overseers carried their guns more often. Neighbors visited, whispering warnings of rebellion. The white families were restless, their confidence cracked. They'd built their lives on control, on the belief that those they enslaved were too afraid to fight back. And now, that belief was splintering. Among the enslaved, tension mixed with quiet exhilaration. They mourned nothing about the man who had tormented them. Instead, they worked with a strange sense of relief. Shoulders just slightly lighter, glances just a little brighter. No one dared celebrate openly, but the knowledge of what she had done spread like fire in dry grass. The plantation would never be the same. His ghost haunted the land, but not in the way he'd intended. He'd been erased, swallowed by the very earth he believed he owned. Stories like hers don't stay buried. They move quietly at first, like a shadow slipping between the cabins, whispered in the dark when no overseer is near. But over time, they grow louder. By the end of that year, her act had become more than a story. It was a legend. It traveled from plantation to plantation, carried by enslaved people who met at markets and secret prayer meetings, and on the rare occasions they were allowed to gather. Some told it as a warning to their masters, others as a spark of hope for those who felt crushed beneath the system. The details shifted depending on who told it. Some swore she buried him alive while he screamed. Others whispered she'd done it so swiftly he never knew. For enslaved people, her story became a symbol of resistance. They were reminded that courage wasn't always loud or open. Sometimes it hid in plain sight, in the quiet strength of a woman whom nobody thought capable of defiance. For slaveholders, the tale became a source of paranoia. If one slave could strike back so brutally, who else might be plotting in the shadows? This wasn't a story recorded in ledgers or history books. Those who controlled the narrative would never have written her name, never immortalized her act. But in the oral histories of enslaved people, she lived on. She became part of a secret tapestry of rebellion, an unspoken reminder that even in a world built on oppression, power could shift in an instant. Her courage was more than a single act. It was a ripple, and ripples have a way of reaching shores they were never meant to touch. Her name may never appear in textbooks. Her face may never hang in a museum. Yet her story endures not because of dusty archives, but because courage like hers refuses to vanish. She lived in a world designed to erase her humanity, to make her invisible. And still she left a mark, powerful enough to outlive her master, his wealth, and the empire of cruelty he represented. Stories like hers remind us that history isn't just dates and battles. Its whispers passed through generations, fragments of memory stitched together by those who refuse to forget. For every rebellion recorded, there are countless others lost to time acts of defiance that never reached a courtroom or a newspaper, but still shook the foundations of slavery. What makes her story remarkable isn't just the act of burying her master alive. It's the strength it took to even imagine such a thing, to plot, plan, and risk everything in a world where a single wrong glance could mean death. That is a testament to a will that refused to be broken. Today, we live in A time where her story can finally be told without fear, where her courage can be honored instead of hidden. She represents not just vengeance, but resistance, the quiet, burning determination of the enslaved to fight back in any way they could. When we remember her, we're reminded of an uncomfortable truth. History is full of people who were never meant to be remembered, yet their courage carved cracks into systems built to last forever. Her story is a mirror, reflecting both the horrors of slavery and the strength it took to survive it. And though her name is lost, her legend whispers still through the trees of Georgia and through us every time we tell her story.